What would you do if one day you discovered your private property had been turned into a public shortcut without your knowledge? That's exactly what happened to me. But when I blocked that pathway, the HOA Karen absolutely lost it. She called the police, screaming that I was sabotaging the community. She threatened lawsuits. She rallied neighbors against me, all because I dared to reclaim my own land. "You can't do this!" she shrieked, her face turning redder than a stop sign. "People have been using this path for years." Well, guess what? I didn't care how long they'd been trespassing. This was my property, purchased with my money, and I was done being taken advantage of. Little did Karen know, I had discovered something about her that would turn this entire situation upside down. Let me properly introduce myself. I'm Alex, a software developer who works remotely, which is precisely why I chose this suburban neighborhood 3 years ago. After a decade in the city battling noise, traffic, and zero privacy, I finally saved enough for my dream, a modest house with actual land around it. The listing advertised private one, 2-acre lot with mature trees and natural boundaries. Perfect, right? I'm not antisocial, far from it. I enjoy the occasional neighborhood barbecue and always wave to joggers passing by. But my home is my sanctuary, my refuge, the place where I can decompress after staring at code all day. That's why I specifically chose a property at the end of Oak Ridge Lane, backing up to a small wooded area. I paid a premium for that privacy. Now, about Karen Thompson. Where do I even begin? Picture the quintessential suburban enforcer, perfectly highlighted bob haircut, perpetually pursed lips, and a voice that somehow carries across 3 backyards. She's lived here for 27 years, a fact she mentions in literally every conversation. As HOA board president for the last decade, Karen treats our neighborhood bylaws like sacred texts that only she can properly interpret. The Henderson family had their trash cans visible from the street for 3 whores after collection yesterday. She once announced at a community meeting, as if reporting a felony. Her husband, Bill, mostly stays quiet, occasionally offering apologetic smiles when she's mid-tirade. Our neighborhood, Whispering Pines Estates, consists of about 40 homes, most built in the early 2000s. It's objectively beautiful, tree-lined streets, well-maintained common areas, and a small pond where residents fish on weekends. The HOA fees are steep at $450 monthly, but the amenities seemed worth it. When I first moved in, everything was peaceful. I spent weekends landscaping, building a small workshop in the backyard, and enjoying quiet evenings on my patio. I noticed a narrow dirt path cutting across the far corner of my property, but my realtor had mentioned it was an old utility access route that hadn't been used in years. The property survey clearly showed it was within my boundaries. About 6 months after settling in, I started noticing footprints along that path. Then bicycle tracks, then dog waste. Soon, neighbors were regularly using my property as a convenient shortcut between Oak Ridge Lane and Maple Street, saving themselves a whole 3-minute walk around the proper way. I tried to be reasonable. I really did. I placed a small, polite sign, "Private property, please use community sidewalk." It disappeared within 24 hours. I replanted it. It vanished again. Then came the HOA letter, printed on their official letterhead with Karen's signature prominently displayed at the bottom. "Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that you have attempted to restrict access to the community pathway on your property. This pathway has been in continuous use by Whispering Pines residents for over 15 years and constitutes an established community easement. Please remove any signage or barriers immediately. Sincerely, Karen Thompson, HOA president." I was livid. I immediately pulled out my property documents. There was no easement listed? None. I called my realtor, who confirmed what I already knew, that path was entirely on my property, and I had every right to restrict access. The situation escalated when I found tire tracks one morning. Someone had driven a vehicle across my yard. The grass was damaged, and my newly planted flower bed was partially destroyed. That same afternoon, I spotted Karen leading a group of neighbors along the path, pointing at various spots on my land as if conducting a tour. "Excuse me," I called out, approaching them. "This is private property." Karen's smile never reached her eyes. "Oh, Alex!" We were just discussing the spring beautification project. The community has always maintained this pathway. It's been here since before your house was even built, but it's on my property, I replied, trying to keep my voice level. And I don't recall giving permission for group tours across my yard. Don't be difficult, she said, her tone shifting instantly. This path connects our community. People use it to reach the pond, to walk their dogs, to visit neighbors. It's been this way for decades. One of the neighbors, an older gentleman I'd never spoken to, chimed in, "My grandkids use this path to get to their friends' houses safely, away from street traffic." I felt cornered, outnumbered, made to feel like I was the unreasonable one for wanting control over my own property that I paid for. Every morning, I'd watch from my kitchen window as neighbors cut through, some even glaring at my house, as if I was the villain in their daily commute. Children would ride bikes across my yard. Teenagers would leave energy drink cans behind, and dog owners regularly failed to pick up after their pets. The final straw came when I discovered Karen had organized a pathway cleanup day without consulting me. I returned from a grocery run to find 6 neighbors on my property, trimming branches, laying down wood chips, and I couldn't believe my eyes, installing a bench near my property line. "What is happening here?" I demanded, nearly dropping my shopping bags. Karen approached with clipboard in hand. "Just some community improvements. We took a vote at the last HOA meeting. Don't worry, it's all being done with HOA funds." "But I didn't vote," I said, feeling my patience evaporate. "And this is my property." Karen's smile tightened. "Well, you should attend the meetings if you want to say. Besides, this pathway easement predates your ownership." That night, I couldn't sleep. My property rights were being systematically eroded, and the HOA was acting like I should be grateful. Something had to be done. I needed to reclaim what was rightfully mine before it was too late. The morning after the pathway beautification incident, I woke up to find an official-looking envelope stuffed in my mailbox. The Whispering Pines Estates logo gleamed mockingly in the corner. With growing dread, I tore it open and unfolded the letter inside. "Dear homeowner, following our community meeting on April 15th, minutes attached, the HOA board has unanimously approved Resolution 47B regarding the community pathway maintenance and expansion. 3 of the HOA covenant regarding established community access points. Failure to comply within 30 days may result in fines of $100 a day until resolution. Sincerely, Karen Thompson, HOA President." I nearly coked on my coffee. They were not only demanding continued access to my property, but now wanted to expand their intrusion. The audacity was breathtaking. I immediately pulled out my HOA covenant documents and scoured them for this mysterious Section 8.3. After an hour of reading legal jargon, I found it, a vaguely worded paragraph about preserving historical neighborhood pathways. But nothing, absolutely nothing, specifically mentioned my property or any easement. I called my realtor again, who connected me with the title company. They confirmed once more, no easements were recorded on my property. None. That afternoon, I drafted a firm but professional response, attaching copies of my property survey and title documents. I hand-delivered it to the HOA office, where the part-time secretary promised Karen would receive it promptly. The very next morning, I had to leave early for a doctor's appointment. As I attempted to back out of my driveway, I discovered Karen's silver Lexus SUV parked directly behind me, blocking my exit. I honked lightly, thinking it might be a temporary stop. No response. I waited 5 minutes, then walked next door where I knew Karen lived. I rang the doorbell twice before she appeared, coffee mug in hand, not a hint of surprise on her face. "Oh, Alex," Is something wrong? She asked with exaggerated innocence. Your car is blocking my driveway, I said flatly. I need to leave for an appointment. She took a slow sip from her mug. I'm just waiting for the landscaping committee. We're doing a walkthrough of the neighborhood pathways today. Shouldn't be more than an hour. An hour? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Karen, you can't block my driveway for an hour. That's illegal. Well, she replied with a tight smile, so is obstructing a community pathway that's been in use for decades. I received your interesting letter yesterday. Perhaps we should discuss what it means to be a good neighbor in Whispering Pines. The implied threat was crystal clear. Move her car? Only if I back down on the pathway issue. I'll call a tow truck, I warned. Go ahead, she shrugged. My husband plays golf with the owner of Riverside Towing, but I'm sure they'll respond eventually. Fuming, I walked back home and called an Uber to make my appointment. When I returned 3 hours later, her car was gone, but something new had appeared on my property. A professionally made sign hammered into the ground at the entrance to the dirt path. Community pathway, public right-of-way, established 1998. I was speechless. She had actually trespassed onto my property to install this. This propaganda. I immediately yanked it out of the ground, marched to my garage, and tossed it behind some boxes. My hands were literally shaking with rage. That evening, as I tried to unwind with a glass of wine on my back patio, I noticed unusual activity. Neighbors I rarely spoke to were suddenly taking evening strolls across my property, some pointedly staring at my house as they passed. A woman I'd never seen before let her massive Great Dane stop and defecate right in the middle of the path, then walked away without cleaning it up. This wasn't coincidence. This was coordinated. Karen was mobilizing the neighborhood against me. The following day brought more surprises. 3 separate delivery trucks attempted to use the path as a shortcut to reach homes on the other side, leaving deep tire tracks across my lawn. When I confronted one driver, he shrugged and said, "Lady told me this was the delivery route. Said it would save me time." Lady, Karen. Of course. That night, I received 4 separate emails from neighbors I barely knew, all with the same basic message. We've always used that path. My children need that safe route to school. You're destroying neighborhood harmony, and my personal favorite, we were using that path before your house even existed. The next morning, I discovered someone had placed flyers on every doorstep in the neighborhood. The headline read, "Community Access Under Threat." Below was a poorly photoshopped image of a castle with a moat and drawbridge superimposed over what was clearly my house. The text beneath claimed I was attempting to privatize a historical neighborhood pathway that has served generations of Whispering Pines families. It was war. Psychological warfare, but war nonetheless. The final straw came 3 days later. I returned home from grocery shopping to find Karen standing in my front yard with 2 men in business attire. They were measuring the pathway with professional equipment, while Karen pointed and directed their work. I slammed my car door hard enough to make them look up. "What is happening here?" I demanded, storming across my lawn. Karen's face lit up with that same artificial smile. "Alex, perfect timing. These gentlemen are from Parkway Construction. They're just taking measurements for the pathway improvements we discussed in the HOA meeting." "We didn't discuss anything," I said through gritted teeth. "And you have no permission to be on my property." One of the men looked confused. "Ma'am, you said this was HOA common land with an approved work order?" Karen's smile didn't falter. "It's a community easement. Alex here is just a bit confused about the property boundaries." "I am not confused." My voice was rising now, blood pounding in my ears. "I have the survey, I have the deed, and you are all trespassing right now." The construction workers exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them muttered something about coming back when things are sorted out as they packed up their equipment. As they walked away, Karen's pleasant mask finally slipped. She stepped closer, voice low but intense. "Listen carefully. This pathway has been here for 20 years. The community needs it. Your selfish behavior is affecting property values and neighborhood relations. The HOA board has already approved funds for legal action if necessary. I felt my stomach knot with anxiety, but held my ground. This is my property, Karen. I have the legal right to control access. Her eyes narrowed. We'll see about that. Sometimes being legally right doesn't matter when the entire community stands against you. As she walked away, I realized this had escalated beyond a simple property dispute. My home, my sanctuary, had become ground zero for a neighborhood civil war, and Karen was marshaling her forces against me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I felt violated, angry, and increasingly isolated. But something inside me hardened. This was my property. I had worked too hard to let it be taken from me piece by piece. It was time to fight back, and I knew exactly where to start. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when I was jolted awake by the sound of angry voices outside my front door. My heart hammered against my ribs as I peered through the blinds. There, standing on my porch like an invading army, was Karen, flanked by 4 stern-faced HOA board members. Their expressions could have curdled milk. I threw on a robe and reluctantly opened the door. Finally, Karen's voice cut through the morning air like a chainsaw. "We've been waiting for 15 minutes. Is this how you treat your neighbors?" Before I could respond, she thrust a thick manila folder against my chest. "This is a formal cease and desist order. You will remove that barricade you've erected across our community pathway immediately." My makeshift barrier, a series of potted plants, and a small decorative fence had been my last desperate attempt to reclaim my property. I'd installed it yesterday afternoon, my hands shaking with both fear and determination. "That barricade is on my property," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have every rights?" The veins in Karen's neck bulged dangerously. "What about our rights? The rights of 37 families who have used that pathway for decades?" A balding man in a golf shirt stepped forward. "We've unanimously voted to pursue legal action, Alex. This is your final warning before our attorneys get involved." My mouth went dry. Legal action? Attorneys? On my teacher's salary? Karen's eyes narrowed to venomous slits. "And if that doesn't work, we'll contact the police. This is criminal obstruction of a public right-of-way." As if summoned by her threat, a police cruiser rolled slowly up my driveway. My stomach plummeted to my feet. I took the liberty of calling them already," Karen smirked, her voice dripping with false concern. "For everyone's protection, of course." 2 officers approached, one young and eager, the other older with tired eyes that had seen too many neighborhood disputes. "We received a call about a property dispute," the older officer said, glancing between us. Karen immediately launched into a performance worthy of Broadway. "Officer, this person has illegally blocked access to a community pathway that's been used by families for 20 years. Children can't get to school. Elderly residents can't take their walks. It's unconscionable." The younger officer turned to me. "Is this true, sir?" My hands trembled as I clutched the doorframe for support. Never in my life had I felt so cornered, so utterly alone. The neighbors I'd hoped to befriend now stood as a united front against me, their faces masks of righteous indignation. I have documentation," I stammered, retreating inside to grab the folder I'd prepared: my property survey, deed, title insurance, and the email from the county assessor confirming my property lines. The older officer reviewed my papers carefully while Karen huffed impatiently. Long, excruciating minutes passed. Finally, he looked up. "Ma'am, according to these documents, this pathway is indeed on private property. There's no easement recorded." Karen's face flushed crimson. "That's impossible. We've been using that path since. Usage doesn't constitute legal right-of-way without an easement," the officer interrupted calmly. "If you believe there's been an error, you'll need to address it through civil court, not criminal proceedings." For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw Karen's imperious facade crack. her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for water. The younger officer turned to the HOA group. "I'm going to have to ask you all to leave this property now." As they retreated down my driveway, Karen spun around, her face contorted with fury. "This isn't over, Alex. Not by a long shot. The HOA has deeper pockets than you can imagine." I watched them leave, my momentary triumph already souring into dread. This wasn't a victory, it was merely the eye of the hurricane. The morning after my confrontation with Karen and the police, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by scattered papers, my hands wrapped around a mug of now cold coffee. The temporary relief I'd felt yesterday had evaporated like morning dew. Karen's parting words, "The HOA has deeper pockets than you can imagine," echoed relentlessly in my mind. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. This wasn't just about a pathway anymore. This was psychological warfare, and I was outnumbered and outgunned. But something had shifted inside me. The constant anxiety had crystallized into something harder, more determined. I'd spent my entire adult life being reasonable, accommodating, avoiding conflict. Where had it gotten me? Backed into a corner in my own home. "No more," I whispered to the empty room. "No more." With trembling fingers, I picked up my phone and made the call I'd been avoiding to. Patricia Winters, a property rights attorney whose name I'd found after hours of desperate late-night research. "They've been trespassing, harassing you, and making false claims about easements?" Patricia's voice was sharp, clinical. "And they called the police on you for protecting your own property?" "Oh, honey, we're going to have some fun with this." The retainer fee made me wince. There went my summer vacation fund, but the weight lifting from my shoulders was almost worth it. 2 days later, every member of the HOA board received a certified letter from Patricia's office. The language was exquisitely professional, but the message was unmistakable. "Cease all trespassing on my property immediately or face legal consequences for harassment, defamation, and violation of property rights." I watched from my living room window as Karen's postal carrier delivered her letter. She tore it open on her front lawn, her face transforming from curiosity to shock to purple rage in the span of seconds. When she looked up and caught me watching, I didn't look away. For once, I held her gaze until she broke contact. Small victory, but it felt enormous. The next day, I hired a local contractor, a burly man named Mike, with forearms like tree trunks, to install a proper fence around the perimeter of my property, including across the infamous pathway. Not just any fence, but a 6-foot cedar privacy fence with concrete footings. It cost me nearly 3 months' worth of savings, but as Mike said while hammering in the posts, good fences make good neighbors, or at least keep the bad ones at bay. We installed private property, no trespassing signs every 20 feet. Not the flimsy plastic kind, but heavy-duty metal signs bolted directly to the fence posts. "They'll need a chainsaw to get these down," Mike chuckled, tightening the last bolt. I expected immediate retaliation from Karen, but the neighborhood remained eerily quiet, too quiet. I knew better than to think she'd surrendered. A week later, Patricia called with news that made my heart race. "I've been doing some digging into your HOA's financial records," she said, excitement evident in her voice. "They're public documents, you know. And guess what I found? 3 separate expenditures authorized by Karen Thompson for community pathway maintenance on what is legally your property. She used HOA funds, we're talking almost $2,800 for those signs, landscaping work, and even paid those contractors you caught measuring for the pathway expansion. Is that illegal?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. "Misappropriation of HOA funds? You bet your sweet bippy it is," especially after she was explicitly informed that the land was private property. "This isn't just trespassing anymore, this is financial impropriety. We're filing a lawsuit first thing tomorrow morning." The following weeks passed in a blur of legal documents, depositions, and increasingly desperate attempts by Karen to rally the neighborhood against me. But something had changed. As news of the lawsuit spread, neighbors who had once glared at me now avoided eye contact entirely. A few even approached me quietly, confessing they'd had their own run-ins with Karen's reign of terror over the years. She told us we couldn't paint our shutters navy blue because it wasn't an approved heritage color, one woman whispered, as if Karen might be listening from behind a bush. But the Andersons have navy shutters. When I pointed that out, she said they had grandfathered approval, whatever that means. The day of our court hearing arrived with perfect dramatic timing, sunny, clear, not a cloud in the sky. I wore my best suit, the one reserved for parent-teacher conferences and funerals. Patricia looked like she'd stepped out of a legal drama, her briefcase practically radiating confidence. Karen arrived flanked by the HOA's attorney, a nervous-looking young man who kept adjusting his too-tight collar, and 3 board members who seemed increasingly uncertain about their life choices. The judge, an older woman with steel-gray hair and piercing eyes, listened patiently as both sides presented their cases. When it was our turn, Patricia methodically laid out the evidence: my property deed, the survey, photographs of Karen's trespassing, and the coup de grace, the HOA financial records showing the unauthorized expenditures. Your Honor, Patricia concluded, this isn't merely a case of mistaken property boundaries. This is a calculated campaign of harassment and misappropriation of funds by Miss Thompson, who continued these actions even after being explicitly informed that she was trespassing on private property. Karen's face had progressed through various shades of red during Patricia's presentation. When her attorney fumbled through his rebuttal, she finally erupted. "This is ridiculous!" she shouted, jumping to her feet. "That pathway has been there for 20 years. Everyone uses it. Who does he think he is, moving in and disrupting our community traditions?" The judge's gavel came down with a crack that made everyone jump. "Miss Thompson, you will control yourself in my courtroom," she said, her voice quiet but commanding. "Property rights are not determined by community traditions, but by legal documentation, which clearly shows this land belongs to the plaintiff." Karen sank back into her seat, but couldn't resist one last mutter. "We've always maintained that path. Always. And therein lies the problem," the judge continued, fixing Karen with a steely gaze. "You used HOA funds, money collected from all homeowners, to make improvements on private property without permission or legal right. That, Miss Thompson, is misappropriation of funds." The verdict came swiftly. The HOA was ordered to pay damages for trespassing and unauthorized modifications to my property, plus all my legal fees. Karen was personally liable for the misappropriated funds and removed from her position on the HOA board effective immediately. As we left the courtroom, I caught sight of Karen surrounded by furious board members, their angry whispers carrying phrases like personal liability and never mentioned this risk. For the first time in months, I drove home feeling like I could breathe again. The fence around my property no longer felt like a desperate last stand. It was simply a boundary, clear and respected. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed my next-door neighbor who had previously avoided me giving me a tentative wave. Perhaps there was hope for peaceful coexistence, after all, just with better defined boundaries. And as for Karen, last I heard she was putting her house up for sale. Something about wanting a neighborhood with stronger community values. I couldn't help but smile at that. Community values indeed. The dust from the legal battle had barely settled when the HOA called an emergency community meeting. I received a formal invitation, the first time I'd ever been personally invited to anything HOA-related that wasn't a complaint. The community center was packed, every chair filled, with latecomers standing against the walls. The tension was palpable, like the air before a thunderstorm. As I walked in, conversations hushed and heads turned. I felt dozens of eyes tracking me as I found a seat in the back row. The new HOA president, a retired judge named Walter, cleared his throat and stepped up to the microphone. "We've called this meeting to address recent events concerning property rights within our community," he began, his voice steady but uncomfortable. "The board has prepared a statement." He unfolded a paper, adjusted his reading glasses, and continued, The Oak Ridge Homeowners Association formally and unreservedly apologizes to Alex Thompson for the unwarranted intrusion upon their private property. Our actions were inappropriate, misguided, and contrary to the respect for individual property rights that should be fundamental to any community organization. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Furthermore, Walter continued, the HOA hereby commits to a complete overhaul of our policies regarding property boundaries. No action will be taken without proper legal verification of ownership and rights. We have failed as an organization, and we are determined to rebuild trust with all homeowners. I noticed several neighbors nodding in agreement. Others looked shocked as if they'd never imagined the mighty HOA could admit wrongdoing. Karen, predictably, was nowhere to be seen. Within weeks, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. The neighborhood grapevine buzzed with news that she'd accepted a position in a retirement community 3 states away as head of their homeowners association. God help them. I spent the spring transforming my once contested property line. The intimidating fence came down, replaced by an elegant stone wall with a beautiful wrought iron gate locked. Of course, but aesthetically pleasing. I planted a row of flowering cherry trees that would, in time, create a natural privacy screen more beautiful than any fence. Sometimes, while watering my new garden in the evening, I'd notice neighbors slowing their walks to admire the transformation. A few even stopped to chat something unimaginable just months before. My next-door neighbor Tom confided one evening, I always take the long way around now when I walk my dog. But honestly, I don't mind the extra steps. It's quieter somehow, more peaceful. I just smiled and nodded. Every time I hear car tires slowing near my property line, I can't help but chuckle to myself. Because I know Karen will never darken my doorstep again, and that knowledge is sweeter than any victory in court. Have you ever encountered a nightmare neighbor like Karen? Or found yourself tangled in the bureaucratic web of an overzealous HOA? Trust me, friends, you are not alone in this struggle. The battle for property rights and basic respect continues in neighborhoods across the country every single day. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever stood your ground against someone who thought their authority trumped your rights, if you've ever felt that sweet, sweet vindication when justice finally prevailed, I want to hear from you. Drop a justice served in the comments below. Share your own Karen encounters. Let's build a community of people who refuse to be bullied in their own homes. And don't forget to subscribe for more dramatic real-life stories. Hit that notification bell too, because who knows? Next week, we might be tackling another entitled Karen, an unreasonable landlord. Or perhaps even a revenge story that'll make you cheer out loud. Remember, your home, your rules, your peace of mind.